Has been the fate of Bigfoot? That's an important question here in Stevenson, Washington, where in the surrounding area of Skamania County there have been so many sightings of Sasquatch that over the years this area has been simply tabbed Bigfoot country.
From a seasoned soldier witnessing a massive figure crossing a river to a towering humanoid stalking a father and his son, these are the recent most terrifying Bigfoot encounters decoded by AI. Let's dive in. On the morning of August 4th, 2025, the Canadian River in Oklahoma was quiet under a clear sky, its surface reflecting the rising sun as a motorist named Jeff Powers drove across the bridge of the Canadian River on Highway 4 from Tuttle on his daily commute to work. He had driven that same route for 3 years, always glancing up and down the river as a habit, sometimes spotting deer grazing along the banks, sometimes seeing nothing at all.
Bigfoot is not just big in stature. For some, it's also big business. There's long been a thriving economy built around the legend. Of course, we're a part of that, but we try to get things right.
But on this particular morning, something far larger and far stranger was waiting in the water below. As Jeff's eyes swept eastward, a ripple of movement caught his attention. Not the kind of delicate ripple deer might leave, but a heavy, deliberate wake tearing through the river as though something enormous was striding against the current. He focused on it, and there, about 80 to 120 yards away, was a towering figure. It was completely black, massive in frame, moving north toward the bank, with a stride that was steady and unhurried, as if the water meant nothing to it.
What it is, but I have sent it to a few people to see what they say. Some say it's a Bigfoot carrying a baby Bigfoot. Others say it's Bigfoot carrying a deer.
The river reached only to its knees, yet Jeff knew this stretch of water could swallow a man waist deep, which meant whatever he was watching had to be at least 8 to 10 feet tall, maybe more. On top of that, its width, broader than any man could ever be, reminded him of a 50-gallon drum, only alive, only moving, only real. The fur covering the figure was dark and slick, not shaggy, but lying flat against its enormous frame, glistening in the sunlight, as if it had just emerged from deeper water. As if it had been submerged entirely only moments before Jeff looked down and saw it. It was not lumbering, not clumsy, but purposeful, pushing its way through the river toward the tree-lined bank, its wake trailing behind like a scar across the water. Each step was too deliberate to be confused with any animal Jeff had ever known, and he had been hunting since he was 12 years old. Jeff's first thought was disbelief, yet his body reacted before his mind could settle, and he crossed the bridge, turned his vehicle around in a loop, and raced back for a second look. His pulse raced with the mix of fear and fascination that comes from knowing you are seeing something that should not exist.
I could see broad, square shoulders covered in hair, a giant head, which was encased with these red eyes, and long flowing hair that drooped down onto the shoulders as well.
When he returned to the same spot only moments later, the figure was gone, swallowed by the dense wall of trees that grew right to the edge of the river, the kind of cover that could hide anything the instant it stepped from the open water. After it was gone, the silence of its disappearance was unsettling because just moments earlier it had seemed so impossibly large, so commanding of space and attention. Yet now it had vanished with ease, leaving only the disturbed water and the question of what had truly crossed that river. Jeff would later describe the figure as huge, his voice unwavering as he recalled how the torso alone looked wider than anything humanly possible. To him, the stride cut through the river as if the weight of water carried no burden at all, and the sun had revealed the sheen of its fur, black as shadow, wet as though it had lived beneath the river itself.
Incredible. We had so much intel on this area from the Iowa BFRO, plus we were able to examine the evidence they had gathered on previous expeditions. Just in the time we've been here,
Hear that?
yeah, we've had action on every night we've gone out.
Following the reports of this incident, the investigator who followed up on Jeff's sighting, Matt Moneymaker, noted Jeff's credibility. He is a man with 12 years of military service in the 82nd Airborne Division, a sergeant, a construction worker, a maintenance supervisor, a man of discipline, trained eyes, and steady judgment.
Each year, there are hundreds of Bigfoot sightings across the country. Some people devote their lives to the pursuit of the creature. While there's no conclusive proof Bigfoot exists, when some new evidence pops up, you can bet we're going to check it out.
Yet even he struggled to put exact numbers to the size of what he saw that morning, other than insisting it was massive, wider, taller, heavier than anything he had ever witnessed before. This was no random glimpse of a shadow, no trick of light on water, because Jeff knew the river, knew the animals that lived along its banks, knew the patterns of deer herds, except nothing could prepare him for the towering presence that walked across the Canadian River as though it belonged there. What lingers in the silence of that morning is not just the sight of a creature vanishing into the trees, but the open wound of possibility. The knowledge that in the heart of Oklahoma, just 15 miles from Oklahoma City, something enormous and impossible strode out of the water and into the forest without a trace, leaving only one man with the memory of it. And the question remains, not in Jeff's mind, but in the minds of those who hear his story. What else walks in those woods? What else waits along the rivers? And how many others have seen, but never spoken? Yet this is not the only recent incident. Bigfoot stalks father and son.
If they do exist, I think they're the master of their domain. They've been here. They know where to hide. And if a deer doesn't move, it could be brown. It's brown in a green setting, and you don't see it.
On May 18th, 2025, what should have been a calm father and son fishing trip in the marshlands of Monroe County, Michigan, twisted into something far more chilling. In the woods by Plum Creek, they stumbled into an encounter that would not only terrify them in the moment, but would leave questions gnawing at them long after they escaped. Edward Henry, a 47-year-old demolition worker born and raised in the area, set out with his 12-year-old son and their dog to a secluded fishing spot hidden behind a jail. It is a place where cattails choke the marsh and silence falls heavily, interrupted only by the occasional snap of a branch or distant cry of a bird. But there were sounds in those woods that day that did not belong. By 11:30 that morning, the trio had followed the creek past 4 weathered railroad bridges, the kind of place where nature seems to close in tighter with every step. Here, the smell of mud thickens and the reeds rise like prison bars, and the ground itself feels soft and alive beneath your boots. Yet even then, before anything happened, there was a strange weight in the air that none of them could explain. About 100 yards into the marsh, the dog froze, then bolted forward with a ferocity Edward had never seen, growls tearing from its throat as trees shook violently in front of them. At first, he thought it was deer fleeing from the brush, but the crash of movement was far too heavy, far too deliberate, and something in his gut told him that this was no ordinary animal running. Yet, still, they pressed onward, stepping another 200 yards deeper until they reached the basin of the creek. And it was there, in that unnatural stillness, that everything shifted, because from the left came a sudden rustle, then a tremendous thud as something massive dropped to the ground.
Place to fish that I had been to with my dad ever since I was a little boy. And as I was walking, something began to pace me from inside the wood line.
The kind of impact that makes the earth itself feel like it recoils. Out of the shadows, a crouched shape began moving toward them, and though Edward could not yet see its face, there was no mistaking its size or the thickness of its frame. On top of that, there was something in the way it advanced that was different from any animal he had ever seen, because this was not the movement of prey fleeing, but of a predator closing in. The dog, loyal and fearless, exploded toward it, but the thing moved with a speed that did not make sense, vaulting from its crouch and ripping through the brush in a blur of dark fur and unrelenting power. It crashed through trees as it tore up the slope and vanished over the railroad tracks that cut across the marsh, leaving only silence and dread in its wake. Experiencing this, Edward's son stood frozen, pale and wide-eyed, his voice cracking as he insisted that what they had seen was no deer, no bear, but something gorilla-like. To him, it was massive and hunched, and in that moment, the words hung in the air with the kind of certainty that only comes when reality shatters in front of your eyes.
And he looks at me, he postures to me like, this is my area. Don't come down here. And he begins to teeter from one side to the other side. And his eyes were black as pieces of charcoal, and he never took his gaze off of me.
Trying to steady themselves, they began the long walk back, but the woods were no longer still, because behind them came the sound of crunching leaves, deliberate steps that followed in rhythm with their own. And though they never caught sight of what stalked them, the presence was undeniable, heavy and suffocating, as though the forest itself had turned against them. It was then that survival instinct took over, forcing them to leave without hesitation. When investigators from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization spoke to them, their stories spilled out in raw detail, too vivid and too aligned to be dismissed, and their voices still carried the tremor of fear that no one could fake. What they described was not only consistent, but impossible to ignore. They both recalled a dark, furred creature that moved upright, hunched but still towering nearly 6 feet as it ran, with a body so thick and powerful that it seemed designed to dominate. Although their glimpse was brief, it was long enough for them to know that what they had seen did not belong in those woods, or anywhere at all. The boy insisted the thing would have been much taller if it had stood straight, and in those few seconds, they had seen the impossible made real. For just a moment, the sunlight had caught its massive frame, outlining its back and shoulders before it disappeared into the brush, leaving behind an image so sharp that neither of them could ever scrub it from memory. Matt Moneymaker, the BFRO investigator who followed up, spoke with Edward and his son separately, and the more he pressed them, the more it became clear that this was no mistake, no misidentification. What they had described was not a bear crashing through the marsh, but a dark, furred primate, upright and deliberate, moving with a terrifying confidence. He noted that it had never dropped to all fours, but instead stormed across the slope on 2 legs, hunched yet still taller than a man, with a stride that carried it out of sight in seconds. Though their encounter had lasted less than 10 seconds, it was enough to shatter a lifetime of certainty about what does and does not walk these woods. The investigator pointed out why such a creature might be there, because the marsh around Tamarack Creek is a perfect hunting ground. With deer protected year-round by restrictions that forbid hunting and cattails thicken the marsh, these would provide food and shelter, creating a secluded pocket where something could survive undisturbed, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And yet, there was no photograph, no physical proof, because when chaos explodes in front of you, the mind does not reach for a camera. It reaches for survival, leaving Edward and his son with nothing but the haunting clarity of memory. And sometimes, memory is far heavier than evidence. What lingered most was not just the image of the thing, but the knowledge of how close it had been. It was close enough to stalk, close enough to strike, close enough that it had chosen to let them go. That was a truth that weighed on them long after they left, because once you know something like that is real, the world never feels safe again. Following the reports of this encounter, some laughed, mocking the idea that a giant ape would choose Monroe as its home. However, others pointed out that strange tales have haunted the downriver area for decades, stories of tracks, shadows, and encounters too unsettling to be dismissed. For Edward and his son, May 18, 2025, is now etched into their lives, a day when the ordinary dissolved into horror, when a father and son on a simple fishing trip brushed against something both primal and impossible. Even though the encounter lasted mere seconds, it revealed a darker reality that most people will never face. A reality where the woods are not empty, where silence is not safe, and where something ancient and merciless is still out there, watching, waiting, and stepping closer than anyone dares believe. City man stalked in the woods. On a dark, quiet night, a man found himself face to face with a nightmare he could never have expected. The man remains anonymous, unwilling to let his identity be public, but his story has spread like wildfire because he captured something horrifying. Clear images of what can only be described as Bigfoot staring straight through his window. How did his story begin? It all started as an innocent escape that quickly turned into a chilling memory he'll never shake. Seeking peace, the man had retreated to a small cabin deep in Washington's wilderness, far from towns, people, and the constant noise of everyday city life. He was searching for calm, hoping the ancient trees and the serene winds would help him recharge, but nothing could prepare him enough for what he was about to encounter. On his second night, as he sat alone by the fireplace, soaking in the silence, a shadow crept up. At first it was nothing, just something catching the corner of his eye. Maybe it was just the woods settling in. At least, that's what he thought. But as he got up to close the blinds, his heart dropped. Outside, through the cold glass of the cabin window, a face was watching him, and to make matters worse, it wasn't human. The figure's face was massive, framed by tangled dark hair. Its eyes were deep-set and gave off a faint, unnatural glow, piercing through the night with an unsettling intelligence. His skin prickled as he realized it was watching him, studying him. Realizing this, every muscle in his body froze. He knew the stories about the creature and had heard the legends people laughed about, yet here he was, staring into the face of one of those very tales. Gathering what little courage he had left, he reached for his phone. His hands shook, making the first few photos blurry. But he kept clicking, each flash lighting up the creature's face for a brief, terrifying instant. Despite the flashlight, the creature didn't flinch. Instead, it only seemed more curious, almost entertained by his shaky movements. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and vanished into the darkness beyond the cabin's glow, leaving the man with nothing but his hammering heartbeat and a deep, bone-chilling fear. Following this scary encounter, the man couldn't sleep. Hours passed, and with every creak and rustle from outside, he imagined the creature coming back. When dawn finally broke, he dared to look at the photos. Most were blurred messes, but a few captured a clear, undeniable outline of something massive and powerful lurking outside his window. Still shaken, he thought of sharing his experience with the world. On the one hand, he feared ridicule from the masses. This is because Bigfoot sightings, after all, often ended with accusations of hoaxes and attention-seeking. But he also knew he had witnessed something rare, maybe even groundbreaking. After much hesitation, he decided to post the pictures online, using a fake name to avoid backlash. He uploaded them to several Facebook groups that focused on the subject, hoping to connect with people who might believe him, and the images went viral. Almost instantly, Bigfoot enthusiasts and researchers got hooked by his story, their excitement causing countless debates online. Some claimed this was it, the proof they had been waiting for. People shared his photos across forums, blogs, and social media, and stories poured in from others who swore they had seen the same creature in the forests of Washington. Some skeptics examined the photos, pointing out the blurry edges, the lack of a video, and the absence of any other witnesses to confirm the man's claims. To them, the story seemed too perfect, just another tall tale thrown into the mix. But to those who believed, the details only strengthened their conviction. They noted the unique posture of the creature in the specific spot where it stood and even compared these images to older sightings, finding eerie similarities. They saw these new photos as confirmation, believing they had finally glimpsed the forest's most elusive giant. Despite posting the images, the man refused to get pulled into the chaos. He'd said what he had to say, and he'd shown what he'd captured. He let the photos speak for themselves, watching as his anonymous story took on a life of its own. With the attention the viral post was getting, the questions began. Why was Bigfoot watching him? What had brought this creature so close to a human dwelling? Some speculated that Bigfoot might be a nocturnal creature that got out only at night to avoid human eyes or to hunt in peace. That theory fits perfectly with this sighting, but it also raised the fear factor. The creature had shown itself at night, not out of chance, but by choice. This made people question whether Bigfoot was intentionally stalking the man or it was just a curious encounter. As more people debated, new theories emerged, each one stranger and more chilling than the last.
For decades, researchers have been trying to communicate with Bigfoot. But have you ever wondered who he is trying to communicate with?
Researchers noted that tales of creatures like Bigfoot in Washington dated back centuries, long before European settlers arrived. The tribes of the Pacific Northwest, including the Salish, Yakima, and Lummi, had spoken of a similar being, a hairy, towering figure they called Sasquatch. According to their lore, Sasquatch was a powerful but reclusive guardian of the forests, a creature respected and feared. For these tribes, the Sasquatch was not merely a tale, but a presence, a protector of nature itself. It stayed hidden, only emerging when disturbed or curious. Could this creature have been watching the man out of sheer curiosity? Or was it something darker, a warning, a reminder that some parts of the forest were never meant to be disturbed? The days passed, But the man's unease remained. Each night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was just outside, hidden but aware, watching him from the safety of the shadows. He tried to rationalize it, tried to tell himself it was a one-time thing, but the images lingered in his mind. He could see the creature's eyes faintly glowing in the dark, a silent reminder of the night terror he had encountered all by himself. Online, his story continued to grow, splitting people between believers and doubters. But for those who felt the truth in his words, the photos were a haunting glimpse into something they'd only ever dreamed about. Some saw them as proof, others as a mystery, but all agreed on one thing. There was something out there in those woods, something that wasn't supposed to exist, at least according to mainstream science. The man's story, his photos, and the fear that followed him became a part of the legend, an addition to the endless tale of Bigfoot sightings. Yet to him, it was more than a story. It was a memory, a piece of his life that had been twisted by the unknown. Now, every time he thinks back to that night, a shiver runs down his spine. He remembers the cabin, the silence, the slow, terrible realization that something was watching him. But what scares him most, even in his thoughts, is the fact that he stared at the creature in his eyes. And though he escaped without harm, he knows he'll never truly feel safe again. Not with the knowledge that something out there, something wild and hidden, had chosen to reveal itself to him. Despite the skepticism around the elusive creature, many more people have encountered the creature and captured it on camera.